Hello, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by Scale Computing, the future of computing, edge, cloud, and more. Our speaker today is Scott Mann, Global Channel Chief at Scale. I'll hand it over to Scott to get started.
Thanks so much, David, and I appreciate you guys having me today. As David mentioned, I'm Scott Mann. I'm the global channel chief at Scale Computing here, and we're talking about the future of computing, which is, I'd say, it's a very exciting topic to be talking about in today's world because there's some pretty interesting news that's been covered as of late, and I think we're kind of starting to see a paradigm shift in the computing market itself. So it's kind of something we've been talking about for a while. I'm going to give you a little glimpse into our perspective of everything that you've seen around the news as of late, and really where we see computing going into this new era of technology. So stay tuned with me. We'll obviously go into some of the scale computing platform at the end of it, but really we're just talking about what's happening within the computing and the market itself to get things started off. So one of the slides that I've been doing literally for 20 years, you see here, and I think it's really interesting because there's definitely some things that you've seen in the news, like with the VMware acquisition, that are kind of bringing this to fruition. We're starting to see this come to life. But looking at this slide here, what we're looking at is the evolution of computing since the inception of computing. And we kind of see 20-year cycles. And it started out with the centralized mainframe computing. And what we mean by centralized is everything was basically on a single point of failure. When organizations started to build their applications and really became heavily dependent on that mainframe computing, then it was, okay, we have a need to be more resilient. So we need to distribute this. And that's where client server computing came into play. And you'll see different leaders in these different eras as we go. And then client server computing became difficult to manage because now we have a ton of servers to manage, and it becomes quite cumbersome, quite costly. So then we've all become familiar with the more recent years of centralized legacy data centers that we see, where VMware has very much become the Kleenex of the data center world. They've become the brand name that everybody associates with data center and virtualization. And we've built all these fantastic best practices around centralizing all of your data. And I'm not here to say that that's going anywhere. That's not disappearing. That's not going to be something where we're moving away from in the future. But what we're seeing is a new need evolving. We've built all these best practices around the four walls of the data center and around keeping that data that's within there resilient and ensuring that there's no security breaches or anything that can happen. And either our customers can access the thing they need to access, or our end users can access the applications they need to access. But now we're seeing these new trends in technology that's driving data outside of the data center. We're seeing things like IoT technologies. And what we're actually seeing is a need for kind of evolving the data center to incorporate data outside of the data center where it's distributed. And this is a new world. This is a new era that we're getting into, and it's becoming real in all sizes, all verticals, everywhere, where it's, instead of everything being in a cloud, whether that be a private or a public cloud, they can still live there, but there also needs to be an incorporation of things at the edge. So now we're seeing this big trend around edge computing. And the reason that you see a lot of these things happen is, we've built all these great best practices around the data center, and we've seen all of that innovation. If you guys followed the industry over the last 20 years, you saw new companies coming out, you saw companies getting acquired, all of these new products coming out, you saw companies going public, and now we're seeing that kind of trail off, and you're seeing companies get acquired by companies that you might not be considered in that data center space, even though they definitely are a part of it. And that's because you think of a technology trend, you think of any market trend. When you see innovation start to slow down, that's because it's reached its market share, it's reached its mass adoption. So now we look where technology continues to innovate, and that the innovation isn't leaving computing, it's just moving to the edge. So now we're seeing this great boom, and this is something that any partner that's listening to this conversation, if you've probably heard the term edge computing, but maybe you haven't looked into it enough at this point. Edge computing is everything that's around you. Edge computing is that SMB customer. It's if you're an MSP, it's you, or it's distributed enterprises, it's manufacturing, it's retail, it's all of this. There's a use case around all of it where edge computing is going to benefit everybody. So if you haven't looked into it yet, then now's the time to get moving on that, especially with some of the recent events that we've seen. And then boldly, what we put at the bottom here is you see like there's all the different names. IBM was to mainframe era, Microsoft was to the PC era, and VMware was to the data center era, what scale computing is to the new era of edge computing. We'll prove that out in a little bit here, but first I want to talk through what we're seeing in the market right now. And that's everything around this big acquisition of VMware. Now, I'm not here to stake any claims and say this is for sure what's going to happen. But if you look at the market and how everybody's reacting to it, there's obviously a lot of everyone's a little bit concerned about what's going to happen. And there's been a history of acquisitions from companies like Broadcom, where companies the innovation in the products that they acquire sometimes disappears. And a lot of that is around just if I think back to early financial classes that I took in that BCG matrix. And if those that aren't familiar with it, it was a simple matrix that covered market share and market growth, right? That was the X and the Y axis. And there was 4 key components. There was dogs, question marks, stars, and cash cows. Throughout those last 20 years that we just talked about, where VMware was to the data center, the legacy data center space, VMware has always been a star, right? But now if you look at what's happening with VMware, their growth isn't happening. Their growth is in single digits. So the growth isn't there. The market growth isn't there anymore. And what that moves them down to is the cash cow. So when you see a company acquire a product like that, the fear and the concern in the market is that you still want to be able to get as much as you can out of that cash cow. But to do that, you have to shift from the net new business to the existing business. And to get more money out of existing business, 2 things typically happen. 1, costs go up. So I would not be surprised if you see a big licensing change on the VMware side in the coming years, or the coming, not even years, within the year, I would say. And then the other thing is decreasing their expenses. So when you see decreasing your expenses, a huge expense for any software technology company is typically in R&D. So innovation typically get put on hold. And it's really more of a focus on how do we thin out everything so that we can make more off of our existing customers. So whether that comes true or not, we'll all look back on this in 2 years, and we'll be able to further analyze what actually happened. But the way we're seeing this is that this is a paradigm shift, which is kind of validating that last slide that I've been presenting for literally 2 years now. So it's kind of interesting to see these things come about. So what we did when we first heard about this, we went to LinkedIn. We have a good following on LinkedIn, all our partners and customers on LinkedIn. And we just asked, what is their feeling around the impact of this acquisition? And the one thing I don't like about a LinkedIn poll is that you can't do all of the above. It's one choice. But the one thing I like about here is I think it's pretty certain that everybody is just unsure of what's going to happen with this. But everyone's, I'm going to proceed with caution. I need to proceed with caution, but I'm not going to change everything that we're currently doing. You've built these processes, you've built partnerships, relationships, customer relationships, vendor relationships around this product that you've been selling. So of course you're going to proceed with caution, but you're going to proceed. However, one of the things that I think if everyone had the opportunity to select, they probably would select all of them. And the one thing that I would encourage everybody to do is in a time like this, make sure to protect yourselves, look for those alternatives. And that's really what this presentation is about. What are those alternatives? Is it cloud? Is there another VMware alternative? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in today's presentation. But the takeaway, if you have not looked into VMware alternatives, I'm sure you're on this presentation because you're looking for just that. But now's the time to start looking, and hopefully I can convince you that scale computing is that perfect VMware alternative for you by the end of this presentation. So another thing that was kind of interesting was last year we did a survey. We did a survey actually with Spiceworks, and what we did was they went to current and previous VMware users, and they asked them. They did a survey across what they think of the solution itself, and these are kind of the 4 complaints that we got out of it. One was complexity, unreliable, painful, and expensive. And you see on the complex side that nearly 50% of users said that it was too complex of a solution, and it was very expensive. There's certifications, and you require multiple different experts to just run the solution itself. And then when you think of unreliability, unreliable. That kind of I think it's a byproduct of the complexity and the expense, because that a solution like VMware, it's built with, you can build it out to be a reliable solution. But the problem is when you want to build it to be that reliable, I might be an SMB customer and I can't afford it, or I might be an SMB customer and I don't have the headcount to do it, or I'm an MSP customer and my customers are just too small. They don't need that size of an infrastructure that you can get all that reliability in it. And then on the painful side of it, you see at the bottom there, they spent 12.3 hours managing and patching. Now, in today's world, technology is evolving fast, right? And what we're seeing is this shift in the IT industry where IT was always seen as an expense to the organization. IT is now being seen as a driver of innovation. And you're seeing a kind of a convergence between IT and OT, the operational side of the house. And all of that is putting more demand on the IT. So what you shouldn't have to do with your infrastructure is like you think of the infrastructure of your house, right? The electrical, the plumbing. You want to get to your house and you want those things to just work. You have new projects that you want to do in your house. You're building out some great new things. You want to go focus on those new products. I don't want to walk into my house, turn on the lights, have to go down to the breaker, mess around with the breaker to get the lights to turn on. That's the way that infrastructure should be in today's world. And that's not the way that VMware is necessarily designed to be, because it was designed 20 years ago. And frankly, the architecture it's a bit archaic now. And there's a better way to do it. There's a more efficient way to do it. And the infrastructure itself should be more autonomous. But that's not necessarily a VMware problem. It's a design of the architecture itself of the traditional legacy data centers, right? When you're spending 12.3 hours managing and patching, that's because there's a lot of complexity in the architecture itself. There's so many different layers. You've got VMware, whatever the virtualization layer may be, it's VMware, maybe it's Hyper-V. It's sitting on some host servers. So now you're talking about two different vendors that you're working with on the day-to-day, those two different support teams that you need to call. That's mapped across a network, another vendor, another team to call, to a SAN, maybe dual SANs, another vendor, another thing to call. And all of these technologies are all independent of each other. So when it comes to updating anything, when it becomes a security vulnerability and it affects one layer that needs to be updated, if it's VMware that needs to be updated, you need to ensure that VMware update that you're moving it up to patch over a security vulnerability, it's not going to have any problems running on the firmware of your servers or the firmware of your SAN. And if those are older servers or SAN, I bet you it's not going to run on it, which is going to create even more problems for you. So that's like the architectural design itself is what's creating that pain. It's what's creating the complexity, and it's what's creating that expense, because you're dealing with multiple different vendors, multiple different licenses, multiple different upgrade paths. It becomes very, very expensive. So I think now the time better than ever, if you have not looked into a solution, this might not be for all of your customers right now. You might be thinking, some of my customers, absolutely, I agree with this. Well, for those customers, now's the time to look in that VMware alternative. And now we introduce ourselves to the scale computing solution, right? So scale computing, we've been providing HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure solutions from the data center to the edge since 2012. So we have customers in over 30 plus countries. You can see it all over here on the top left of the slide here, but customers in 30 plus countries, 15,000 plus systems deployed, a 91 net promoter score. A net promoter score is basically the support score. So what our customers give feedback after they have any interaction with our support team. And that just goes to show the simplicity of the solution. We have such a high score, 91. That is top of any industry that you could possibly get. And there's 24 patents. And the patents I'm not going to really touch on right now, but that is very relevant. And I'll probably touch on that in the next couple slides. We have head offices. Our head office is in Indianapolis, and then R&D is at San Fran, but we have a global presence. We have customers from US to Europe to Southeast Asia to Oceania, all across the world, being able to support that around the clock. And you can see some of the different industries that we support in the top right there, everything from retail to hospitality. There is some manufacturing on there, as well as logistics, shipping. And those are definitely some bigger names, and those are just some brand names to talk about, but those aren't necessarily our staples. There's definitely some SMB customers. There's a ton of SMB customers. There's a ton of mid-market, and yes, those large distributed enterprises as well. And I'll explain on the following slides some use cases, what use cases we fall into, what size of customer is a perfect fit for which solutions we have. And then the next piece down there, establishing technology ecosystems. The one thing about today's infrastructure world is that it is, like I said before, that convergence of IT and OT. They're putting a lot of demand on the IT department. So what we're trying to do is be able to provide a platform to solve for as many use cases as possible, be the building blocks, the Lego blocks for an IT infrastructure, so that we can build the foundation of the production environment that they need to run. And they can layer it up from there, whether it be remote sites, whether it be VDI solutions, and have all of those ecosystem partnerships from our side of it integrated with that solution, so that you can feel that you get that one seamless solution that you're being provided. And the core things that you see at the bottom there, those are like the three components that make us different: maximizing uptime, improving operational efficiency, and reducing the overall costs. I'd say the main thing right now that you're probably looking at is reducing overall costs. If we can reduce costs by 70%, upfront costs as well as costs throughout the ownership, the life cycle of that product, worth having a conversation, right? So now let me give you a little bit of an overview of the product, and I'm gonna break down the slide a little bit for you into each of the segments. SC platform stands for Scale Computing Platform. The SC / platform is for short. That is the umbrella solution. That's the umbrella product. So platform itself is the all-encompassing everything that we're talking about here today. That includes ecosystems, that includes the management layer, that includes the on-premises type of solutions. Now we're going to start off there's two key components that we'll really touch on, is Hypercore and Fleet Manager. So we're going to start off first at Hypercore, and Hypercore is the foundational software of the entire platform. So Hypercore itself is a Linux-based software, and what it does is it incorporates storage, servers, and hypervisor into one very easy to manage UI. So think of it like the smartphone of the infrastructure world. A smartphone integrates your phone, your calendar, your Rolodex, all of these other functional applications, into one single very intuitive user interface. That's exactly what Hypercore is. It's very advanced technology under the hood that presents it to a very easy to use user experience. And there's really three key components of our operating system itself. So it's a kernel. Within the kernel, there is that top layer is the hypervisor, right? So the hypervisor, we talked about the patents on the last slide. That's not a patented hypervisor by us. It's KVM under the hood of it. So you don't even need to know what KVM stands for. You just need to know that it's integrated there and it's an industry standard and it works with all the applications that you're going to have running. The bottom layer is Scribe. So Scribe is our block engine. And what that does is it pools all of the resources across from whatever drives are in a single server to however many servers are in that stack, pooling those resources to make it one big single pool that is redundant. So kind of give you that cloud-like experience. I have this much storage, that much storage. It's all redundant. It's redundant across multiple servers in the cluster. And then that I guess would be another one of the patents we talked about. And then in between those two layers would be our state machines. So the state machines are what create an autonomous infrastructure. So we're talking about Hypercore runs on on-premises hardware, right? It can run on, we'll show you some of the micro edge type use cases all the way up to the large use cases. And no matter what it's running on, all this functionality comes included with it. But what we're trying to deliver is a simplified experience for the user. Give them that cloud-like experience from a simplicity perspective at an affordable price point. So in those state machines, what they're doing is they're creating that autonomous infrastructure. They're monitoring conditions. So Hypercore gets installed on each drive in each server and within a cluster, pooling all of those resources together. And the way that it manages, it's monitoring the drive 1 on server 1 all the way to drive 8, 10 on server 5, 6, 7. And if there's anything that goes wrong, like it can't reach the IP address of a single server, or the drive's failed, there's a corrupt data on the drive, whatever it may be, it's smart enough to be able to heal that information, to be able to recover from whatever that incident was. So it's constantly monitoring all of these different conditions so that you don't have to worry about those 12 hours of patching and management. It's there, it's doing it all for you. You have that peace of mind where you can go focus on the other tasks at hand. Either that's you managing it for your customer or your customer managing it themselves. And then because we have all of these storage and hypervisor integration, we can also have some pretty neat local backup and disaster recovery functionality included as well, and included at one single price point. So we talked about complexity and unreliability partially being a byproduct of complexity and cost. The disaster recovery, the local backup functionality, all that comes included. There's no additional cost. You don't have to go get a separate management console, a separate license. Do you get hardware somewhere else? You can now build out a disaster recovery site, even if that's a single server that you're sending over there. Now we look at the different use cases. Where does this really apply to? And that's the box that you see above HyperCore. Obviously, the very top left, there are virtual servers. If they're running production workloads, that's perfect for this. Of course, the traditional virtual servers, virtual machines that they're going to be running on it, whatever can run on an Intel x86 can run on us. That's where we really cut our teeth in the industry. But those use cases have evolved, like I mentioned. One of the most common ones, especially throughout the world that we just lived in from working from home, was virtual desktops. And we can provide a virtual desktop solution with some of our technology partnerships at a price that is significantly less than what you'd be familiar with in like a VMware or a Citrix type of deployment. So being able to provide, doesn't matter if the data is in the data center or if it's on someone's machine that is a traveling salesman. We can provide a solution for all of those types of workloads. Then you talk about business resilience, and this doesn't really play into necessarily the production workload space. HyperCore, yes, it can play in production workloads, but it can also sit alongside as that what you'd be more familiar with as a backup appliance, sitting alongside a VMware, a physical, a Hyper-V, whatever it may be. And this really applies into that MSP space, where you'd probably be more familiar with something like a Datto solution that's running on premises beside a single server. That server might be VMware. Well, you might not be ready to refresh that server. It might be a pretty new server, but you can put a business resilience solution beside it, and you're talking about 40% less, 20 to 40% less of what you'd be expecting from an alternative backup solution, but you're getting all of the same value of HyperCore built into that business resilience solution. And we're bringing in another partnership there where they're able to provide the local backup and cloud backup, and that's with Acronis actually, and for any type of solution that they want to run alongside it. So it is the perfect opportunity to go sit a scale computing business resilience solution alongside a single VMware server. And then once that VMware server comes up for a refresh, it's, hey, why don't we just run these workloads on this business resiliency solution? You're going to have a fully redundant infrastructure locally on premises, but then you're also going to have this hybrid cloud infrastructure with something like Acronis, where you can send all of the backup to Acronis' cyber cloud. And we can build out that hybrid cloud for them, but do it in a way that's very economical for them and makes sense with refreshes that they have coming out, which of course segues into my next one of hybrid cloud and being able to manage what hybrid cloud is really. I think when you think of cloud, everyone thinks of it as like someone else's data center, which of course it is. But cloud in today's world is an architecture, right? Cloud in today's world is where should the data be? Where should the data be residing to be most resilient, most performant, most cost effective? And we can provide that solution on premises for them and integrate that with whatever their cloud strategy may be for production, for backup, whatever that solution may be. And one of those great use cases is like video surveillance. So video surveillance, we're getting a little bit more into some of the edge computing use cases. But with video surveillance, we're talking about being able to run Resorts World, for instance, which is one of the customers you saw on the last slide. Resorts World runs thousands of cameras with petabytes of storage and racks of servers that are scale computing servers. And they need to be able to run all of that in a resilient format, but also be able to leverage that in the cloud. So we have not only a partnership with the video surveillance technology solution, also with the cloud solutions that we can get them cost-effective storage in the cloud, a resilient, cost-effective solution for that use case as well, being video surveillance. Then you've got some more edge use cases like containers, robo, so just any remote office, branch office, and IoT, which I'll touch on in a few slides here, so I won't spend much time there. But with all these different use cases, one of the most difficult parts is being able to manage it all. And that's where the second component comes in, which is SC Fleet Manager. But having one single cloud-based fleet management console where you can access this anywhere in the world as long as you have a browser and an internet connection. And why that's important is because managing on-premises infrastructure when you're a single person in IT becomes extremely difficult, especially when you want to take a vacation. You got a VPN in. It's not it. What if you don't have a great internet connection? You're going to have a really tough time being able to get into that. Being able to manage it and orchestrate your entire fleet, whether that be 1, 3, 5, or thousands or tens of thousands of locations, manage that from one single cloud-based fleet management console where everything rolls up into it. You can pop it up on your phone, check it in the morning, and have that peace of mind to continue on your way with your vacation. Now, when we look at the fleet management, if you look at that's the key component that makes this a huge differentiator for us in this market. Whether that be the SMB client that's got one site and then a DR, or they've got 5 sites, being like a small municipality with city hall, their data center, their DR, their fire hall, all being managed under one site. The hardest part of having a solution like that and being able to manage it all is being able to scale. And with our fleet management console, you can deploy seamlessly. You can manage your clusters around the world, upgrade them with a simple click. And here's a couple quotes that when I first read these ones from some Gartner analysts really gave me chills. But this, I think, is validation for that very first slide where I was saying that what scale computing is to the modern era of edge computing. Now, what does a scale computing platform provide? So these are kind of the four key components that you look at. And these are, if we look back to some of that research, availability, it's built in, autonomous, system's going to run. It's designed with N+1 redundancy. So they don't need to worry. Even if they're a small customer that typically runs a single server, we have a solution for that. And we have a solution that has the same expectations of that large enterprise customer from a resiliency perspective we can provide for that single server. From a simplicity standpoint, everything from the way it's managed to the way it's designed to the way it's installed, it's all meant to be simplified so that you can go focus on other things and let the infrastructure run for itself. And then from an efficiency perspective, having that architecture that I mentioned, the way we designed it, it can run on a fraction of a core, and per node, 1 to 4 gigs of RAM. On the high end, maybe 6 gigs of RAM. So we're talking about being able to utilize all of the resources that you have in your server, and not having that consumed vaporware for our operating system, and being able to run on the smallest of architectures. And when you look at efficiency and simplicity, one of the two things that those combine to is affordability. It's going to be a much more affordable solution upfront. We're going to have more resources available than the competitor, and it's going to be much easier to manage and reduce their overhead long term. And then the flexibility, I think, is very important. Scaling up, scaling down, scaling sideways, whatever the use case may be. We have a solution that is very versatile so that it can address all of their smallest of use cases to the largest of use cases, whether it's their needs today or in 3 years. And we'll actually look at the hardware here on this next slide. So we're talking about hypercore running on different on-premises hardware, right? And what does that hardware look like? What is that flexibility, that versatility that I spoke about? So these are the different solutions from our HE100 all the way up to our HC5000. And one of the key things here is when we talk about flexibility, all of these can be mixed and matched. So you can add a 100, which this is something that literally fits in the palm of your hand. It's based on the Intel NUC. And it is the size of an Apple TV, basically. That can be mix and match with any of these clusters. You can mix and match with an HC5000 if you wanted to. I would probably never see the use case where that will happen, but it's possible because of the way that architecture was designed. So looking at the right side here, starting at the HC5000, you've got a system that can run, up to in a single node, hundreds of terabytes of storage. Really, with a really beefy 2U type of system that can run many different use cases, whether it be GPUs and want to run a VDI use case, or video surveillance and want to run a very storage heavy type infrastructure. or a high compute infrastructure that has quite high storage needs. And then you've got the HC3000 beside it. That is an all NVMe type cluster. So we're talking, let's get to the future of of storage devices, and let's leverage that NVMe SSD and that 7x performance that you typically see out of NVMe versus the SATA. So we're talking about the powerhouse of the hyperconverged world, being able to run extremely high IOPS for a 3+ node cluster. Then the HC1000 is really the Swiss Army knife. It can run, if your customer has a few terabytes of storage, if they've got all flash requirements, if they've got GPU requirements and they're doing, a smaller GPU type deployment, VDI type deployment, I should say. The HC1000, it's probably our most common deployed solution out there. And then the HE100 and 500, those are the edge type use cases, whether it be a single node, like the HE500 as a single node at an offsite location, or the HE100 replacing that single server, but replacing 3 of them at the same price point of that single server at multiple sites, and all managed from that one single platform using Fleet Manager. So that's where all of these different use cases can all be mixed and matched in an environment, all managed under fleet management, all managed under our Fleet Manager console, I should say, giving them that flexibility of being able to bring in whatever that use case is that they have today on their plate to whatever that use case that they're going to get in a year on their plate. Now let's cover the elephant in the room here. This is probably the most common question that we get. Like, okay, great, you've got a great alternative to VMware. We see how it makes a ton of sense, but why wouldn't I just go all cloud? And here's 5 things that you should consider with an all cloud deployment. And when I say why not all cloud, I want to preface this slide with, I don't think that I mentioned before the cloud is an architecture, right? I think the cloud makes sense. A public cloud makes sense in use cases. And it's really just determining that for your customer, determining that for yourself. And here's some of the things to consider when you're talking to your customers, or you're considering this is for your own needs. But number one is the cost. And that's hands down the most important one. We saw this big boom of everyone moving to the cloud, moving to public clouds. And now we're seeing the opposite happen. And you can look at a lot of analyst reviews. That's exactly what's happening, because they're looking at the cost of what it now takes for them to run it all in the cloud. And they're saying, hey, I need to move my stuff back in because I can't afford this. All of those promises of simplicity and flexibility, what we didn't consider was what that cost is going to look like 3 years down the road. So if cost is a consideration, definitely something where you should build out a hybrid model for them. Data, there's this huge boom of data that's happening, and this is definitely more in the edge computing space. But you think about it in a manufacturing warehouse, when we're using IoT devices, we're using IoT devices for building a better product, prolonging the life cycle of very expensive $2 million+ hardware equipment, I should say. And all that data that's being collected is now being collected by the environment as opposed to just by an individual human inputting data. So we're seeing like 1,000 times the data. And that's an explosion of data that might not be able to be handled by the existing infrastructure. So it might not be cost prohibitive, like the network bandwidth might not be able to handle it right now, and to upgrade the network might be very expensive. So all this boom of data, you need to bring the compute closer to the data that's being generated and bridge it to the cloud. And then there's things like latency. In the manufacturing world, I'll give you another example. Leveraging the cloud for something like the manufacturing line, and there's high definition cameras that if they need to go and report back to a cloud, and then the cloud tells you that, hey, that bottle is defective, and then the machines will automatically pull that bottle off. Just the sheer physics of going from the cloud back to that camera, that bottle's long gone. So bringing the compute closer gives them that real-time compute as well, so they get the immediate response. Then there's resiliency factor. I'm just going back to the manufacturing one, but sometimes those manufacturing warehouses aren't always in the best of area for connectivity. And if they need to always be up, always be running 24/7, 365, it can be very expensive to have to rely on multiple internet providers, or in some cases where the internet goes down and they still need things to run. Having that local compute addresses that. Or regulations is the last one. You're collecting a lot of data from this. Let's give you a retail example here. You walk into a retail shop. That retail shop, let's call it a grocery store. It immediately picks up the IP on your phone. It immediately acknowledges you on their camera. It makes sure that you're not on a blacklist or anything, and it wants to create a custom experience for you. If you've ever been to any of these smart stores, you go to digital signage, and the digital signage is customized for you as a consumer, and it's creepy. And they're like, how do you have all this information? But they're using that information, that big data, to generate a consumer profile on you and provide you with a better experience. They're also using it to increase all of their efficiencies, the operational efficiency across the warehouse. But all of that information that they've collected on you, that's all sensitive information now. If I have a touchless experience when I'm trying to check out, all of that information they now have, and it's all going directly to the cloud. And there's regulations that are currently exist just on our personal data itself. So regulation is another key one to look at. And if it's not regulated now, it's likely to be regulated in the near term. And one of the things when we look at, edge computing, I'm going to get a little bit more into the edge side. But one of the things that I kind of mentioned at the start of this is that some people think of edge computing has become a big buzz term. And what is the edge? Where is the edge? Everyone thinks it's this massive, large deployments only, and it's that manufacturing warehouses that I was talking about, or it's those retail, but it's not. Edge computing is going to be something that's going to benefit your small SMB customer. Edge, whether they've got 1, 2, 3 types of use cases, 3 types of sites, or if you're an MSP. An MSP is a great use case for Edge because you're truly managing tens, hundreds of customers across whatever geography that you cover, and you need a solution that you can manage. You can lower your overhead of managing all of those customers. And if we can provide you a solution that gives them local resiliency, decreases their cost, decreases your cost, and provides you with a better service because of all the resiliency that's built into it, then that's just a win-win-win. Win for your customer, you and us together. And then in the distributed enterprise, that's where these use cases come into play. Maritime, retail, manufacturing, hospitality, casinos, telco, energy, and ag. Of course, those are all great use cases for this. But all of them kind of have pretty similar deployment type of scenarios. So I'm going to walk through those in the next slide here. There's 3 common scenarios, and I'll add another one here, and I'll touch on the MSP type of scenario. But you might be running that single server, like I mentioned on the in relation to the business resilience stuff. You're running that single server, and you're running a data backup appliance, something like that. Or in a retail scenario, you've got a physical infrastructure for all the different point solutions. So you've got your access controls running on a single server. You've got your video surveillance running on a single server, your digital signage, that type of setup, which you see very common in a grocery store. If you look at any store manager's office, there's typically a ton of systems that are running. Those are all point solutions, and there's no redundancy in them. There's also nobody on site that's going to be able to fix any of those solutions. So expensive to address any of those problems. Or you've got a virtual infrastructure, but it's 2 hosts with no high availability. Or you've got that 2-2-1 infrastructure, which is 2 servers, 2 switches, and a SAN, which gives you some form of resiliency, but still not the ideal, still single points of failure. And in some scenarios, not cost effective for those employees. What we can do is basically address all of those use cases under the SC platform, give them the resiliency, the high availability at a cost that is affordable for them. And from a management perspective, they can manage it all from that one single point, that one single pane of glass. I know that's a very cliche term to use, but from that one single UI as the fleet manager. So here's 3 different use cases that we talk about: retail, maritime, and hospitality. And this doesn't always need to be IoT that's driving this. In an MSP's world, you're probably just running 4 or 5 production type of VMs on a single cluster. But you're running different applications. And then you've got an IoT gateway. And then you're connecting to one of those 3 different scenarios we talked about on the previous slide. Get rid of those 3 different scenarios, and you can run it on local on-premises hardware with SC Hypercore running on that, giving them that single unified resilient solution so that they can have something that even a store manager can install, something that it doesn't take a full fleet to go deploy all of these. It can all be managed from the fleet manager and deployed seamlessly, managed seamlessly from somewhere halfway across the world, all in a much more affordable fashion than what they're used to. Now, what we're doing with there's obviously a lot of buzz right now in the industry, and I'd say if you look at our website traffic, if you look at we have quote requests that where they can get an MSRP quote on the website. You look at that traffic that we have coming in, it is huge right now. It's booming, and it's all around everything that we're seeing in the news. So there's an opportunity right now for both of us to educate the market on the alternatives, and scale computing being one of those alternatives, and talk to them about where does it make sense to run from cloud on premises. So we're running this, we're calling our stress-free summer promo, and this is something that we can put together with any of you in your regions. But basically, let's get a meeting, let's get a qualified meeting set up, and let's give away something like a Fitbit. In this scenario, it's until August 5th. Anybody who schedules that meeting, we do a demo, receives a Fitbit. So any of you it's applicable to any of you on the call. But how do you use this? How you can take this away with you? And there's my 3 steps here. Number 1, if you're not a partner yet, go to partners.scalecomputing.com and click register, which you can see kind of in that little image that I have there. Click register here. It takes a couple clicks. And once you've put in your information, click register, you're officially a partner in the community. It's that simple to sign up, very seamless. And then let's engage with our regional channel team. We can tell you more about the training opportunities, enablement opportunities, what other market resources that we have, and that are available to all of our partners, no matter what tier it is, and get you guys set up with a program where we can run something like that VMware alternative campaign, and leverage that in your community to let's grow together. Let's seize this opportunity, and let's make the most of this opportunity. And with that, I know we're about on time here. David, do we have a couple minutes for questions, Q&A?
Yes, we've got some questions in from the audience, and we can take those now.
Okay, all right. So I see some of them in here. First question, what are the partner requirements to sign up? There are no requirements. So there's no minimum requirements to join the community. There's obviously added benefits to the different tiers, and for what I like to say is the investment that our partners give to us, we want to give back to them. So no minimum requirement to sign up, and there is added benefits in terms of MDF and everything else like that our partners can get once they do sign up with us. Next question is, can I get a POC? And yeah, we do have, there's multiple ways to address the POC, but it depends if it's a customer POC or if it's a solution for yourself internally. We do have a free demo trial that's available on the site for customers, and we do also have a partner promo that is available to any of our partners, so you can get your hands on a free cluster. We cover the hardware costs. It comes with the fleet manager that we talked about. It comes with our data center infrastructure certification, which is training on doing the install and such, and just an opportunity to get hands-on with the system and then use this for demo gear with your customers. It's perfect with the HE100 series, so you can run that cluster that fits in the palm of your hand. You can run that as your POC, your demo environment, and then you can take that to a customer's, leave it at your customers, get them up and running on that, play around with it, let the customer play around with it, and then they can trial out all the software and everything that you have included in that solution. And then last question I see here is mentioned Intel NUCs. So there's 2 different Intel NUCs that we use, the Intel NUC 10 and the Intel NUC 11. The Intel NUC 11 is in partnership with Intel, so it's called the Intel NUC Edge Enterprise Compute. So it's a pretty cool joint partnership with them. And those ones are probably the ones that you're going to see going forward, and some other systems in the future, but those ones have dual NICs. They have Intel vPro. So it is truly an edge use case for the Intel NUCs. And it comes obviously included with preloaded with our software on it as well. So the Intel NUC 10s and the Intel NUC 11s, which are newer on as of this quarter. So I appreciate everybody's time. I'll pass it back over to you, David.
Thank you, Scott. A reminder that you can take steps to get involved with the Scale Computing Partner Community. That information is on the screen again now. We thank you for attending this session. We look forward to another Scale webinar with all of you soon. Have a great day.